In the heart of a small, quiet village, nestled between lush green hills and flowing rivers, Zuri's life seemed like a picture from a distant memory. Simple, serene, yet touched by an undeniable sadness. The sun rose every morning, casting a golden hue over the fields where she worked, her hands skilled in weaving and tending to the land her mother had loved so much. Zuri's life had once been filled with joy, laughter echoing through the cottage where she and her mother had shared quiet moments before fate had dealt her a cruel blow. Zuri's mother had passed away when she was just a young girl. The loss had been more than a passing event in her life. It had carved a void in her heart, leaving behind a deep ache that would never heal. She had clung to the memory of her mother, the warmth of her embrace, and the stories her mother had told her under the night sky. But when her mother died, her world shifted. The village had watched with pity as Zuri's life took a darker turn. It wasn't long before her father, trying to move on, remarried. His new wife, Mirembe, came into their lives with the promises of stability and support. But for Zuri, Mirembe was not a source of comfort, but a constant reminder of what she had lost. Her stepmother's coldness was like a shadow that stretched over Zuri's heart, suffocating it with every passing day. Mirembe was beautiful, and in the eyes of many, she was everything Zuri's mother had not been: strong, composed, and commanding. But behind that composed exterior, there was something darker. Mirembe did not see Zuri as her daughter. Instead, she treated her like an outsider, a burden in the house that her presence seemed to strain. She whispered harsh words when Zuri was out of earshot, creating a web of lies that stained her reputation in the village. The villagers, once kind to Zuri, started to whisper. They began to look at her differently, like something was wrong with her, something they couldn't place but made her feel out of place in her own home. Mirembe's lies were subtle but powerful. She told everyone that Zuri was lazy, irresponsible, and even that she had no respect for tradition. It was as if Zuri were a stranger in her own life, a life she hadn't chosen, and one she felt powerless to change. As each day passed, the weight of her stepmother's words crushed Zuri's spirit. The once lively girl, who loved to run barefoot through the fields and sing her mother's lullabies to the birds, had become quieter, more withdrawn. Every time she passed a group of villagers, their eyes seemed to judge her. The gossip, the murmurs of her supposed wrongdoings, cut through her like 1,000 tiny knives. No matter how hard she tried to prove her worth, it was never enough. Zuri's internal struggle began to take root, not just in her mind, but deep in her soul. She began questioning herself, her worth, her place, her very existence. Was she truly the person Mirembe portrayed her to be? The lies twisted inside her, feeding her self-doubt. Was she lazy, as Mirembe said? Or was it just that she didn't fit into the mold her stepmother had set for her? Was she even capable of making the right choices, or was she destined to always fall short in the eyes of others? The emotional toll began to show. Zuri's once lustrous hair now fell limp around her shoulders, and the light in her eyes dimmed. Her father, too, was blinded by Mirembe's charm, not seeing the pain in Zuri's eyes. She had become an invisible figure in her own home, a mere shadow in the background of the life that Mirembe had slowly built for herself. But in the quiet of the night, Zuri would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. Why did Mirembe hate her so much? What had she done to deserve this? And in those long, sleepless nights, she made a vow to herself. She would not let her stepmother's lies define her. No matter how many times she was pushed down, no matter how many lies were spun about her, she would find her own path. She would discover who she truly was, outside the web of deceit that her stepmother had woven around her. In the depths of her despair, Zuri did not know it yet, but she was beginning to build the strength she needed to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Her journey was just beginning, and soon someone would come into her life who would change everything. But for now, Zuri was still a girl, trapped in the pain of her stepmother's lies, fighting to find the courage to rise again. This section sets the emotional and personal foundation for Zuri's journey, touching on her daily life, her painful past, and the emotional burden she carries. The narrative paints a vivid picture of her struggle against her stepmother's manipulation, giving depth to her character and establishing her internal conflict. Mirembe's schemes were not just the actions of a jealous stepmother. They were calculated moves, each one designed to destroy Zuri from the inside out. She knew exactly how to weave her lies with precision, and she did it with such grace that no one suspected her manipulation. Zuri, despite her beauty and quiet strength, had become the target of Mirembe's spite. At first, Mirembe's lies were subtle, whispers here and there, complaints about Zuri's laziness or supposed carelessness around the house. But soon, these whispers grew louder, spreading like wildfire through the village. Mirembe would often speak in a soft, honeyed voice, pretending to be concerned for Zuri's well-being, making it seem like Zuri was ungrateful for all that her stepmother had done for her. She'd complain to neighbors about how hard it was to raise a child who didn't know her place, or how Zuri never cared about tradition. A statement meant to undermine Zuri's character and her sense of belonging in the family. Each word from Mirembe's lips was carefully chosen, designed to cast Zuri as the villain in her own life. She painted Zuri as someone who was disrespectful, reckless, and stubborn. The villagers, naive and trusting, began to take Mirembe's words as truth, and soon Zuri's reputation was tarnished beyond repair. Every time Zuri passed a group of people, she could feel their eyes on her, judging her, whispering about her. It was as though the air around her was thick with rumors that she couldn't escape. The most damaging lie that Mirembe spread was that Zuri had no respect for the customs of their village. She twisted Zuri's refusal to participate in certain traditional activities as an outright defiance of their ways, and slowly, the village's opinion of her shifted. People who had once smiled warmly at her now turned their faces away, as if she had become an outcast in the very place she had grown up. Zuri could feel their eyes on her, cold and accusing, and she knew her stepmother's poison had reached them all. It didn't help that Zuri's father was oblivious to the storm raging around her. Mirembe had him wrapped around her finger, and she played the role of the loving, supportive wife to perfection. She'd never let him see the cruelty behind closed doors, nor did she ever let him hear her words when she was alone with Zuri. In front of him, she was an angel, the perfect mother to his daughter, but behind his back, she was nothing short of a tyrant. Zuri tried to tell him, tried to explain, but every time he would dismiss her, saying that Mirembe was just trying to help her adjust. "You should be grateful," he would say, not realizing that the more grateful she became, the more Mirembe twisted the knife. The rumors didn't just affect Zuri's relationship with her family. They shook her to the very core of her identity. The constant barrage of lies eroded her self-confidence, and soon she was no longer sure of who she was or whether she was worth the love and respect she so desperately craved. Her once bright spirit began to dull as the weight of rejection and alienation bore down on her. Her sense of worth, once tied to her mother's love and the peace of her home, now rested in the hands of a community that had been turned against her. Every time she looked into the eyes of the villagers, she saw not a trace of the love they once held for her, but coldness, judgment, and fear. Zuri had become a symbol of everything that was wrong in her world. She had gone from being a girl with potential to someone who was tainted, someone to be avoided. Her emotional breakdown came one afternoon when she overheard a conversation between two women in the market. They were talking about the latest rumor to spread through the village, that Zuri had been caught sneaking around with a man from a neighboring village, a blatant lie designed to shame her and further isolate her from the community. Zuri's stomach turned as she stood frozen, listening to their words. "I heard she's just like her mother, reckless and wild. No respect for tradition," one of the women said, her voice thick with disdain. The other woman nodded, adding, "She's nothing but trouble, and Mirembe is a saint for putting up with her." Zuri's heart broke in that moment. The truth didn't matter anymore. Her reputation had been destroyed, and there was no way to fix it. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't seem to win. Her stepmother's lies had become the truth in the eyes of the village, and Zuri had no way to stop the tidal wave of hatred and judgment that crashed down on her. Zuri's reaction was one of internal chaos. She had always been a quiet, reserved girl, but now she found herself fighting against the tidal wave of emotions inside her. She wanted to scream, to confront Mirembe, to tell the world that she was not the person they believed her to be. But each time she tried to find her voice, the words caught in her throat, weighed down by doubt. Could she truly change their perception of her? Would anyone even believe her? The emotional turmoil was unbearable. Zuri couldn't understand why her stepmother hated her so much. What had she done to deserve this treatment? She found herself withdrawing from her family, from her friends, from the world. She felt like an outsider in her own life, a girl who no longer had a place, a girl who had been branded by lies and could do nothing to remove the scar. The more Zuri fought to defend herself, the more Mirembe's grip tightened around her. It was as though every attempt to clear her name only pushed her deeper into the pit of despair. The more Zuri tried to explain, the more the lies were entrenched, and the deeper her self-doubt grew. She had no one to turn to. Her father, blinded by love for Mirembe, wouldn't listen, and the village had already made up its mind about her. But Zuri was not ready to give up, not yet. Despite the tears that would fall in the darkness of her room, despite the crushing weight of her isolation, there was a flicker of defiance in her heart. Somewhere deep within, a part of her knew that she wasn't the villain in this story. She wasn't the liar or the sinner. It was time for her to fight back, to find a way to prove her worth, even if it meant standing against her family and the whole village. The battle had only just begun, and Zuri had no idea how far she was willing to go to reclaim her life. But one thing was certain: she wouldn't let Mirembe win. Not without a fight. Prince Kofi's arrival in the village was nothing short of a spectacle. The moment his carriage rolled through the gates, a hush fell over the crowd. His presence was magnetic, drawing everyone's eyes, but it wasn't just his royal attire or the gleam of his polished armor that made people stop in their tracks. It was the air of mystery that surrounded him. Prince Kofi, the heir to the distant kingdom of Tsiwa, had always been known for his enigmatic charm, and now here he was, stepping foot on a simple village that had never before seen a prince of his stature. His kingdom, far away to the north, was known for its great wealth and strength, but Kofi wasn't here for politics or power. Rumors had spread that he was on a personal journey, one that was shrouded in secrecy. Some said he was looking for something or someone. Others whispered that he was escaping from the pressures of royal life, searching for meaning in the humbler places. Whatever his true purpose, it didn't take long for the villagers to realize that Prince Kofi wasn't just any ruler. He was someone who carried an aura of intrigue that left people wondering what brought him to their peaceful corner of the world. It wasn't long before Zuri, in the midst of her daily chores, crossed paths with the prince. Her life had become a cycle of isolation and quiet endurance under her stepmother's manipulation. But this moment was different. Zuri had been standing by the well, her mind distracted by the whispers and rumors that continued to follow her around. She didn't see him at first, didn't notice the tall, handsome figure approaching, wrapped in an air of both authority and vulnerability. But as she turned to draw water, their eyes met. For a fleeting second, everything around Zuri seemed to vanish. The village, the constant judgments, the weight of her stepmother's lies, none of it mattered. It was just her and the prince, standing in the quiet afternoon sun, a strange, unspoken energy between them. Zuri's breath caught in her throat, and she quickly turned her gaze away, unsure of why her heart was beating faster than usual. Prince Kofi, however, didn't look away. He studied her with a keen interest, his eyes piercing through the facade of her indifference. There was something about her, something raw and authentic that caught his attention. He knew that beneath her quiet demeanor there was strength, an undeniable fire that spoke of resilience, even in the face of hardship. Zuri was the first to break the silence. She glanced back at him, her voice steady but guarded. "You must be the prince," she said, her tone polite, but with a hint of defiance. It was clear that she wasn't one to be easily swayed by titles, especially when her world had been built on lies and betrayal. But there was also a trace of curiosity in her voice. She couldn't deny that the prince intrigued her, not just for his royal lineage, but for the mystery that surrounded him. Prince Kofi smiled, the kind of smile that made his presence even more magnetic. "And you must be Zuri," he said, as though he had known her name long before they met. "I've heard stories about you, though I must admit, I don't believe all the rumors." His voice was warm, sincere, and Zuri couldn't help but notice the genuine tone behind his words. This simple exchange was enough to break the ice. It was clear that they weren't just two strangers meeting by chance. There was a connection, one that was both instant and profound. For Zuri, it was a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time, the sensation of being seen, truly seen, by someone who didn't judge her, who didn't believe the lies that had been told about her. For Kofi, there was something about Zuri's strength, her quiet courage, that fascinated him. It was as if he could sense the depth of her soul, the pain she had endured, and the untapped potential she carried within her. Over the next few days, they found themselves crossing paths more often. Whether it was by chance or fate, they seemed to meet at every turn. Zuri, who had once avoided all attention, now found herself drawn to the prince. He was unlike anyone she had ever met, a man who didn't view her through the lens of the rumors or her stepmother's lies. Prince Kofi saw her for who she truly was, and that was something she had longed for. Their conversations began to flow naturally, as though they had known each other for much longer than a few fleeting days. They would meet by the well, in the village square, or along the quiet paths that led to the forest. Zuri found herself sharing thoughts she had never spoken aloud, and with each passing moment, her respect and admiration for Kofi deepened. He was kind, thoughtful, and above all, genuine, a rare quality for someone of his station. Kofi, in turn, found himself captivated by Zuri's purity and inner strength. Despite everything she had endured, she held on to a kind of grace that he had never encountered before. It wasn't the kind of strength that screamed for attention, but the kind that was quiet and steady, built from years of surviving hardship. Her laughter, though rare, was a sound that made his heart lighter, and her gaze, even when distant or pained, was one that held a kind of wisdom far beyond her years. What started as simple conversations soon grew into longer discussions, their bond deepening with each passing day. Kofi began to confide in Zuri, telling her stories from his kingdom, stories of the burdens of leadership and the expectations placed upon him. Zuri, who had never known the life of royalty, found herself fascinated by the world he came from. And as she shared her own struggles with him, Kofi listened, really listened, something that no one else had done in a long time. For Zuri, this connection was intense, almost overwhelming. She had never allowed herself to be vulnerable before, but something about Kofi made it feel safe. In his presence, she wasn't the girl burdened with rumors and lies. She was simply Zuri, and for the first time in years, she felt as though she could be herself without fear of judgment or rejection. As their bond grew stronger, it became clear that this was not just a simple friendship. There was a spark, something undeniable, something neither of them had anticipated. Zuri, who had always kept her heart guarded, found herself opening up to Kofi in ways she never thought possible. And Kofi, the prince who had once been aloof and distant, found himself captivated by this village girl who, despite everything she had endured, radiated a quiet strength and beauty that no royal title or fortune could ever match. Their connection was undeniable, and though neither of them fully understood it yet, they both knew that something profound was unfolding between them. A bond that neither the rumors nor the lies could ever break. As the days passed, Mirembe's cruelty towards Zuri seemed to escalate with an almost calculated precision. The woman had always been a master of manipulation, but now her lies and deceit were becoming more vicious, more deliberate. No longer content with simply planting seeds of doubt in the villagers' minds, Mirembe began to weave an intricate web of lies, each one more damaging than the last. Zuri's once peaceful existence in the village had slowly transformed into a nightmare. She could feel the weight of Mirembe's words bearing down on her at every turn. Her stepmother would whisper behind her back, or sometimes in front of her, planting rumors and distorting the truth until the villagers no longer saw Zuri as the girl she truly was. She became a target, the object of gossip and judgment, all of it rooted in the cruelty of Mirembe's unfounded accusations. Mirembe's emotional abuse was one of the worst things Zuri had ever endured. The constant put-downs, the belittling remarks, and the sly insinuations made Zuri question her very worth. It wasn't just the words, though. They were accompanied by subtle actions designed to break her spirit. Mirembe would make Zuri feel as if she were never good enough, would use her as a scapegoat for every little problem in the house, and would always make sure the blame fell on her shoulders. But Mirembe's cruelty didn't end with words. As the weeks dragged on, her behavior grew more overt. She would accuse Zuri of things she hadn't done, forcing her into situations where she had no choice but to either comply or face even worse consequences. The emotional toll was heavy, but the physical abuse soon followed too. Mirembe would push Zuri around, making her do all the household chores, and when Zuri would slip up or make an innocent mistake, the punishment was swift and harsh. One evening, after Zuri had returned from a long day of work in the fields, she was met with Mirembe's angry glare. "You are nothing but a burden," Mirembe spat, her voice dripping with disdain. Zuri, exhausted and emotionally drained, barely responded, trying to avoid another confrontation. But Mirembe wasn't done. She grabbed Zuri by the arm and dragged her to the kitchen, where she shoved her toward a pile of firewood. "I told you to chop this by sundown. You never listen," Mirembe shouted, her eyes filled with fury. Zuri stood there, trembling, unsure of what to do. She had become accustomed to the harsh treatment, but every time it happened, the pain seemed to grow. She wished she could fight back, but there was no one to stand up for her. Not even the villagers, who now believed Mirembe's lies without question. Meanwhile, Prince Kofi, who had continued to visit the village, noticed the growing tension in Zuri. He could see the marks of her internal struggle, her once bright eyes now filled with sadness, the forced smiles she gave when they spoke, and the way she seemed to recoil from the simplest of gestures. He had seen enough to understand that something was terribly wrong, but Zuri never opened up to him. She was too proud, too fearful of revealing her pain, even to someone she had begun to trust deeply. Kofi's affection for Zuri had only grown stronger over time. He admired her strength, the way she carried herself with quiet dignity, despite the suffering that seemed to weigh heavily on her. But he also sensed the turmoil beneath the surface. He couldn't help but feel a deep protective instinct towards her, and it was painful for him to see her withdraw into herself more and more. Zuri, for her part, was struggling to come to terms with her feelings. She had grown to care deeply for the prince, but the thought of letting someone into her heart, someone as noble and kind as Kofi, felt almost impossible. Her life had been full of betrayal and heartache, and she couldn't allow herself to be vulnerable again, not even for him. The more she felt drawn to Kofi, the more her fears about her stepmother's schemes began to take root. What if Mirembe's lies were enough to drive him away? What if he believed them, just like everyone else? One evening, as Zuri sat near the village square, lost in thought, Kofi approached her. He had been watching her from a distance for days, noticing how she was becoming more withdrawn. He had to know what was going on. He sat beside her, his presence warm and reassuring, though Zuri barely acknowledged him. "I can see that something is bothering you," he said gently, his eyes searching hers for any sign of what she was going through. Zuri shook her head, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's nothing. Just the way things are." She tried to brush him off, but Kofi wasn't fooled. He knew there was more to it, and he wasn't going to let her push him away. "You don't have to go through this alone," he said, his voice firm but kind. "I'm here, Zuri. I'm not like the others. I see you for who you really are." Her heart trembled at his words. She wanted to believe him, wanted to lean into the warmth he was offering, but the fear of being exposed, the fear of Mirembe's cruelty being made public, held her back. Zuri couldn't let herself be weak, not when her stepmother's web of lies was closing in tighter with each passing day. That night, as she lay awake in her bed, Zuri wrestled with her emotions. She was torn between the prince's affection and the growing torment of her stepmother's lies. It was a constant battle, a war inside her heart. Zuri wanted to be free from Mirembe's grasp, to escape the suffocating lies and the weight of her stepmother's cruelty. But at the same time, she was afraid that embracing the prince, embracing love, would only make things worse. Little did she know, Mirembe's schemes were about to take a darker turn. As the weeks went by, her manipulation became more overt. She began to spread even more vicious rumors about Zuri, making it seem like Zuri was plotting against the prince, trying to deceive him into believing she was something she wasn't. The lies twisted and spiraled out of control, and soon no one in the village was safe from the accusations. Zuri found herself at the heart of a storm, her name being tarnished with every passing day. And all the while, Prince Kofi remained by her side, unaware of just how far Mirembe was willing to go to destroy Zuri's life. The love between Zuri and Kofi was growing stronger, but so was the threat of Mirembe's cruelty. Would Zuri be able to defend herself before it was too late? Or would she lose everything she had worked so hard to protect? The battle for her heart was far from over. Zuri had reached her breaking point. Every day the weight of her stepmother's lies and cruelty grew heavier, and the lies Mirembe had spread about her were becoming a stain on her very soul. The once serene and loving girl had been reduced to a shadow of herself, hiding behind a wall of self-doubt, trying to navigate the harsh world Mirembe had created around her. But deep inside her, something was stirring. A fire, long buried, was beginning to burn. Zuri knew that if she didn't stand up now, the rest of her life would be nothing but the echoes of Mirembe's lies. She couldn't let her stepmother tear apart everything she had built and loved. Zuri had always been quiet, reserved, but she was no longer afraid of the truth. It was time for the world to see her for who she really was, honest, strong, and full of integrity. The decision was made. Zuri couldn't hide anymore. She had to confront the lies, the rumors, and the woman who had made her life a living hell. She had to speak the truth, not only for herself, but for the people she cared about, especially the prince, whose belief in her had become the one thing keeping her tethered to the hope of a better life. It wasn't easy. Zuri had never been one to seek conflict, especially with someone as powerful as Mirembe. The thought of standing up to her stepmother terrified Zuri to her core. But the terror of remaining silent and watching her life fall apart was far worse. She had to find her voice, her courage, and take control of her own story. One fateful afternoon, Zuri found herself standing in front of Mirembe's house, her heart pounding in her chest. The wind rustled through the trees, the sun casting a golden glow over the village, but Zuri barely noticed the beauty around her. All she could focus on was the confrontation that was about to unfold. She could already hear Mirembe's sharp voice echoing in her mind, taunting her, trying to break her down, but Zuri would not let that happen anymore. This was her moment. As she stepped inside the house, Zuri was met with Mirembe's icy glare. Her stepmother was sitting at the table, her fingers twisting a piece of cloth, as though trying to distract herself from the tension in the air. The silence was suffocating. Zuri spoke first, her voice steady, though it trembled with the weight of her emotions. "Mirembe, it's time for the truth to come out. Your lies have hurt me for far too long, and I won't let them define me anymore." Mirembe looked up at her with feigned innocence. "What are you talking about, Zuri? I've done nothing but care for you." "No," Zuri said, her voice unwavering. "You've twisted the truth. You've turned people against me, made them think I'm someone I'm not. You've manipulated everything for your own gain." Mirembe's expression shifted from one of feigned confusion to something darker, an emotion Zuri had come to recognize all too well: anger. Her stepmother stood up, her eyes flashing with fury. "You ungrateful girl! You think anyone will believe you? You're nothing but a liar, and you'll be nothing without me." But Zuri stood tall, her heart racing, her fists clenched at her sides. "I don't need your lies anymore, Mirembe. I've spent too long cowering under your manipulation, but no more. The truth is out now, and I won't let you control me any longer." For a moment there was a tense silence. Mirembe's face twisted into a sneer, but Zuri could see the crack in her stepmother's facade. The power she had so carefully constructed was starting to crumble. "You think this is over?" Mirembe spat. "You've just sealed your fate, Zuri. The village won't believe you. You're nothing without me." But Zuri wasn't listening anymore. She had already found the strength to break free from Mirembe's grip. The words felt like a weight lifted from her shoulders as she spoke again, this time with more conviction. "I don't need the village's approval. I don't need anyone's approval. I know who I am, and you can't take that from me." With that, Zuri turned and walked out of the house, feeling a strange sense of peace settle over her. It was done. The truth was out, and no matter what happened next, she would never again be afraid of the lies. As Zuri left the house, she found Prince Kofi waiting for her outside. His presence felt like a balm to her soul, calming, reassuring, and full of warmth. The prince had witnessed the entire confrontation from a distance, his eyes never leaving Zuri as she faced down the woman who had tormented her for so long. Kofi walked up to Zuri, his expression soft yet filled with admiration. "I'm proud of you," he said quietly. "That took incredible strength." Zuri felt a rush of emotions flood her chest. She had expected the prince to distance himself from her, especially after everything that had been said about her. But there he was, standing with her, supporting her, and showing her a kindness she had long since stopped believing was possible. You believe me?" Zuri asked, her voice barely a whisper, a mixture of disbelief and hope. Kofi nodded, taking her hands in his. "I believe in you, Zuri. I always have." His voice was filled with sincerity. "You're not defined by the lies that others tell about you. You are strong, beautiful, and capable of more than you can imagine." Zuri's heart swelled at his words. She had never heard anyone speak to her like this, with such honesty and care. She had spent so long fighting against the lies, trying to prove herself, but in that moment, she realized that the only person she needed to prove anything to was herself. And with that realization came something even more powerful: her love for Kofi. She had tried to keep her distance, tried to protect herself from the vulnerability of love, but it was impossible to ignore any longer. The connection between them was undeniable, and now, with her stepmother's lies exposed, Zuri felt free to embrace the feelings she had long kept buried. I care about you, Kofi," she admitted, her voice soft yet filled with certainty. "More than I ever thought I could." Kofi's eyes softened, and with a smile he pulled her closer. "And I care about you, Zuri. I'm not going anywhere." In that moment, Zuri knew that no matter what the future held, she had found her strength, her truth, and the love that she had longed for. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Mirembe wouldn't give up so easily. But Zuri was no longer afraid. With Kofi by her side and her heart filled with truth and love, she was ready to face whatever came next. The battle for her happiness had just begun. The days that followed Zuri's confrontation with Mirembe were filled with whispers and uncertainty. But as the truth began to spread, the village's perception of Zuri shifted. No longer was she the girl tainted by her stepmother's lies, but a woman who had stood up for herself, for her dignity, and for the truth. Mirembe's manipulations unraveled, and with each passing day, more and more people began to see her for the cruel woman she truly was. Zuri, once isolated and broken, now found herself embraced by her community. The villagers, who had once turned their backs on her in favor of Mirembe's deceit, now recognized her courage. They rallied behind her, their support a powerful reminder that truth always prevails, no matter how dark the lies had been. Zuri felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She was no longer a victim of manipulation, but a woman with a newfound sense of purpose and strength. It was during this time of renewal that Prince Kofi, who had witnessed her transformation firsthand, decided to express the depth of his feelings. He had always admired Zuri, but now, seeing her rise above her struggles, his admiration had turned into love. One evening, under the starry sky, he took Zuri's hand, his heart beating fast with the vulnerability he had been holding inside. "Zuri," Kofi said softly, his eyes locked with hers. "I've seen the strength in you, the heart in you that refuses to break. And I've come to realize something. What I feel for you is not just admiration, it's love." Zuri's breath caught in her throat. She had dreamed of this moment, but she hadn't dared to believe it could be real. Kofi continued, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "I want to spend my life with you. Will you marry me, Zuri?" Tears welled up in her eyes as she looked into his eyes, the love and sincerity in them overwhelming her. This was the moment she'd been waiting for, the culmination of all the pain and the fight. It wasn't just about finding love, it was about finding herself. "Yes, Kofi," Zuri whispered, her heart soaring. "Yes, I will marry you." As Kofi kissed her forehead, the village celebrated not just their union, but Zuri's victory over her past. Mirembe's defeat was final. Her lies no longer held power over the lives of others. Zuri, now standing strong and confident, had reclaimed her life and her love. She had fought for her truth, and in doing so, had found the happiness she so deserved. The kingdom's acceptance of their love was the final piece in the puzzle. Zuri had come from a place of doubt and fear to find her place in a world where she could finally be herself. With Kofi by her side, and the love of her community surrounding her, Zuri's life was a testament to the power of truth, resilience, and the beauty of a love that had withstood every challenge. And so, Zuri's story ended not with defeat, but with a love that was bound to last forever. As Zuri stood by the window, gazing out at the horizon, she reflected on her journey. The pain, the lies, the betrayal. Everything seemed so distant now. She had endured so much, yet each trial had shaped her into the woman she had become. The little girl, who had once been afraid of her stepmother's wrath, had grown into a woman who could stand tall, unbroken, and unwavering. She had found her strength not just in fighting for the truth, but in loving herself enough to stand up for what was right. Her heart swelled with gratitude as she thought of Kofi, the prince who had not only seen her beauty, but had fallen for her soul. Together, they had overcome obstacles, and in doing so, had created a future full of hope and love. Zuri no longer saw herself through the lens of her past pain. She had embraced her growth, her journey, and the love she now had. Her story, once filled with sorrow and manipulation, had transformed into one of love, strength, and new beginnings. And as she stepped forward into the future, hand in hand with Kofi, she knew that this was just the beginning of her happiness.